Imagine this: a fleet of hundreds of warships cuts through the waters of the Indian Ocean. Their sails catch the wind, their warriors stand ready. Their destination? Not a neighboring kingdom, not a nearby coast, but lands thousands of kilometers away across the sea. Today, sending an army across oceans would require aircraft carriers, satellites, and modern logistics. But over 1,000 years ago, an Indian emperor did exactly that. He launched one of the most ambitious naval expeditions in world history. And for a brief moment, the waters of Southeast Asia trembled before the might of the Cholas. This is the incredible story of the Indian Empire that conquered the sea, the story of Rajendra Chola, and the invasion that most history books forgot. To understand how extraordinary this achievement was, we need to travel back to the 11th century. At that time, Europe was still in the Middle Ages. The Vikings had only recently stopped their raids. The great Mongol Empire had not yet emerged. And across South India, a powerful dynasty was rising, the Cholas. Their heartland lay in present-day Tamil Nadu. But this was no ordinary kingdom. Under the legendary emperor Raja Raja Chola, the empire expanded rapidly. Magnificent temples rose from the earth. Trade flourished. The treasury overflowed with wealth. And perhaps most importantly, the Cholas built something few Indian kingdoms had ever possessed: a powerful navy. Think about that for a moment. Most empires focused on land. The Cholas looked at the ocean and saw opportunity. Merchant ships carried spices, silk, precious stones, and exotic goods across the Indian Ocean. Controlling these trade routes meant controlling immense wealth, and the Cholas intended to do exactly that. When Raja Raja Chola died, his son Rajendra Chola inherited the throne. But Rajendra was not content with simply maintaining his father's achievements. He wanted more, much more. He first expanded the empire across the Indian subcontinent. His armies marched northward. Kingdom after kingdom fell before him. His victories became so legendary that he earned a remarkable title, Gangaikonda Chola, the Chola who conquered the Ganges. According to tradition, water from the sacred Ganges river was brought back to the south as a symbol of his triumph. Most kings would have stopped there. Rajendra did not. His eyes turned toward the sea. Across the Bay of Bengal lay one of the wealthiest powers in Asia, the Srivijaya Empire. Based in present-day Indonesia, it controlled critical maritime trade routes connecting India and China. Imagine Srivijaya as the gatekeeper of international commerce. If ships wanted to move between East Asia and the Indian Ocean, they often passed through waters influenced by Srivijaya. Whoever controlled those routes controlled enormous wealth, and that created tension. Historians still debate the exact reasons for what happened next. Perhaps trade disputes emerged. Perhaps political rivalries escalated. Perhaps Rajendra wanted to demonstrate that Chola power extended beyond India itself. Whatever the reason, a decision was made. A decision that would shock the medieval world. The Cholas would launch an overseas invasion. Now, pause for a moment and imagine the challenge. This was not like marching an army across land. Thousands of soldiers needed food, water, weapons, horses, ships, navigation, communication, and all of it had to function hundreds or even thousands of kilometers from home. Even today, military planners consider overseas operations incredibly difficult. Yet the Cholas prepared for exactly that. Shipyards worked tirelessly. Warships were assembled. Supplies were gathered. Experienced sailors mapped routes across the ocean. And then, the fleet departed. The sight must have been extraordinary. Rows of Chola vessels stretching across the horizon. Warriors carrying swords, spears, and bows. Commanders directing the expedition. The open ocean before them. No GPS, no radar, No satellite navigation, only skill, experience, and determination. The fleet crossed the Bay of Bengal. Then came the attacks, one after another. Strategic ports and important settlements were targeted. The Cholas struck locations connected to the Srivijaya network. The campaign moved swiftly, almost like a lightning strike across the sea. The ruler of Srivijaya, Sangrama Vijayatungavarman, was defeated. Several key centers fell under Chola attack, and suddenly, the supposedly untouchable maritime empire had been humbled. News of the victory spread rapidly. Think about how astonishing this would have seemed to people at the time. An Indian emperor had projected military power across the ocean, not merely through trade, not through diplomacy, but through conquest. This was one of the earliest large-scale naval power projections in Asian history, and it sent a message, a very clear message. The Cholas were not simply rulers of South India, they were a maritime superpower. But perhaps the most fascinating part of this story is what happened afterward. The Cholas did not attempt to permanently colonize Southeast Asia. Instead, they achieved something arguably more valuable: influence. Trade expanded, connections deepened, cultural exchanges flourished. Indian ideas, languages, architecture, religion, and art had already reached Southeast Asia for centuries, but the Chola period strengthened these links even further. Even today, echoes of those connections remain. Visit parts of Indonesia, Thailand, Malaysia, Cambodia, or Singapore. You'll find traces of Indian influence woven into local history. Ancient inscriptions, religious traditions, architectural styles, words derived from Sanskrit and Tamil. The ocean that separated these regions also connected them, and the Cholas understood that better than almost anyone. Yet, despite their extraordinary achievements, many people today have never heard this story. Ask someone about famous naval empires. They might mention the British, the Spanish, the Portuguese, perhaps the Vikings. Very few will mention the Cholas. And yet, more than 1,000 years ago, they dominated trade routes, built one of the strongest navies in Asia, and launched an overseas military expedition that changed the balance of power in the Indian Ocean. That deserves to be remembered. There is another lesson hidden within this story. The Cholas succeeded because they looked beyond their borders. Most kingdoms focused only on what was directly in front of them. The Cholas looked outward, toward the horizon, toward opportunity, toward the sea. While others saw water as a barrier, the Cholas saw it as a highway. And that difference changed history. Today, the Brihadeeswara Temple still stands in Tamil Nadu. Its massive stone tower has watched centuries pass by. Empires have risen and fallen. Kings have come and gone. But the legacy of the Cholas remains, not just in stone, not just in inscriptions, but in the story of an empire bold enough to cross an ocean and challenge the world beyond it. A story of ambition, innovation, courage, and vision. Because more than 1,000 years ago, when most rulers dreamed of conquering neighboring kingdoms, one Indian emperor looked across the sea and thought bigger, much bigger. And for a moment, the waters of Southeast Asia belonged to the Cholas. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe to Whispers of Bharat for more incredible tales from Indian history. Stories of empires, warriors, mysteries, and legends that changed the world. Because history isn't boring, it's the greatest story ever told.